So much to love down here in this game room, but let me show you what I love the most. Now, it took me a long time to put it together, but it was definitely worth it. Everyone who comes over absolutely loves playing it, and it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's also saved me a lot of money at the arcade. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You see to my left and to my right is my Dual Link PlayStation 2, Time Crisis 2, and Time Crisis 3 setup. Last year, it took me over a month to track every item I needed down to complete the full setup. It was pretty easy overall, but still time consuming. What do I mean by System Link Time Crisis 2 and 3? I'm using two PS2s with two copies of each game in order to play like you would in the arcade, side by side with two players working cooperatively. Of course, you can use one PS2, one game, and two of these gun cons, but that's no fun. The screen shrinks down to something you can barely see, and it wasn't a good time for anyone. A setup like this back in the day would have cost a lot of money and would have been out of most people's control in terms of price point. Luckily, things got a lot cheaper, and I'm older with more money, so it wasn't that bad. As you can see from what I'm doing here, these two systems are linked up. Now we can play together. It's very difficult to demonstrate the split screen mode with one person, but let me try to anyways. As you can see, I'm playing the same game in two different people. That's the cool part about the System Link on the PlayStation 2. During game nights, it's an absolute blast to play with a lot of people. But how do you get this set up for yourself? Let me show you all the components that you're going to need to pull this off. First thing you'll need are CRT TVs or old tube TVs. These things are not as common as they used to be, although you can find them pretty easily on marketplaces. Sometimes people give them away for free, sometimes they're about $25. Really nice ones can get expensive. These here cost me $25 each, and I was fortunate enough to find two of the same size, same model, and same manufacturer, so it looks pretty good down here. Those CRT TVs must have composite input. What is that? Well, if you look over here on these inputs in the front of this TV, that would be the yellow video input. That's because the gun cons from Namco require the TV to have it. These gun cons require you to have some kind of composite input. There are workarounds for that, but it's a little more complicated and gets a little more expensive. Especially how easy it is to find CRT TVs nowadays for a cheap price, I'd recommend finding one with composite input at least. To find your CRT TVs, you're going to need two of these. These are Namco GunCon 2s. They were made for the PlayStation 2, and they're pretty common out there on eBay at least. They're not hyper expensive, they're not super cheap. You also need the special cable that it comes with that hooks up into the TV. Usually it's included with the gun itself. After you have your TVs in order and you have that composite input in the front, that yellow cable, you need to make sure that the GunCon 2 that you find off eBay, Marketplace, or wherever you go is including this cable here. This is a splitter T cable. This part goes to the TV, and the GunCon plugs into this. You can use this part here to make it a two-player GunCon game, but you have to have this splitter cable here. It's very important. If you don't have it, you're going to have a hard time hooking up this gun to that TV. It can work, and there's aftermarket solutions out there, but unless you know what you're doing, I'd recommend making sure that this cable is included. This part here will go to the TV, then the PlayStation signal itself that comes out of the back, the composite yellow cable, will go into here. This comes out front in your TV, one GunCon here, if you're playing two-player on the same system, the other one on this side. The GunCon 2 itself is a lot easier to find than this cable. In fact, you'll see this frequently sold without this cable. These things can run anywhere between $5 and $30, but usually if someone's selling something relatively complete, they're going to have the cable with it. At this point, we have two CRT TVs, we have two of these T-splitter cables for the GunCons, and we have two GunCons. But what game are we going to play? No matter what you choose, Time Crisis 2 or 3, you'll need two copies of either game. The good news is these games don't cost that much. They're going to be between $10 to $30, and in general there's a lot of them out there. I have two copies of both. Here's my double copies of Time Crisis 3. When you set this up in the PlayStations, you'll need one copy in each system. TVs, two copies of the game, two GunCons, two T cables that'll come into the TV. What's missing? We're going to need two PS2s. That's the hard part though, because not all PS2s are made the same. It was made for so many years, and there's a lot of hardware variations out there, but only one hardware variation will work for this, and that's one of these here. Let me show you what I mean. No matter what model of PlayStation 2 you have, you do have USB ports, but not all of them have this special port up here, and that's the FireWire port. This little port right here was taken off almost every PlayStation 2 iteration beyond the original fat models, and most of the fat models actually don't have it. This is for data transfer, but more importantly for what they called a System Link cable. If your PS2 system doesn't have that FireWire port, this whole setup won't work. So when you look for a PS2 to buy, and remember, you'll need two PS2s, make sure it has this port here. If it doesn't, this whole setup is not going to function. You'll be very sad. I made the mistake when I was trying to set this up in the first place of not noticing that not all PlayStations had that special port there. That's what took so long to get everything done. I had to keep going to the stores locally and eBay to find PS2s that had that FireWire port on it. There, we have our 2 PS2s, our 2 CRT TVs, our 2 GunCons, our 2 copies of the game, and we have those 2 T-splitter cables. What's the last thing that makes all this work? Here, let me show you. I have my 2 PS2s set up already. You can see one here and one over here. But what you really can't see well is what they call the system link cable. That's this cord here that plugs into the front of that FireWire port on those older PS2 models and goes all the way to the other PS2 into that FireWire port to link the systems up. It was a feature that wasn't used in too many games, but the games that do support it are pretty fun. Aside from the Time Crisis games, I'm almost positive that a Gran Turismo game actually is supported by that as well. I can only imagine how much fun it could be to have 2 players playing on racing wheels Gran Turismo competitively on 2 PS2s. That's something for another day though. System link cables can be found on eBay brand new, anywhere between $5 and $10. They're not super common, but they're not rare either, so it shouldn't be a hard time finding those. So now if you want this set up at home, 2 CRT TVs, 2 of those T cables for composite video, 2 GunCons, 2 copies of the game, 2 PlayStation 2s with FireWire port, and that FireWire link cable. Now for all that, when I bought it last year, going around all God's 3 acres trying to get it together, it cost me a little under $300 total for this whole setup. That's not bad, especially considering how much fun we've had and how much enjoyment we've gotten out of this setup so far. The time, the space, the money, I'd strongly recommend doing a setup like this. It's a lot of fun for a lot of different people, and when it's all going down here on a game night, it sounds like an arcade, and you really can't replace that. One thing I forgot to mention is that there's no pedal that I could find for the PlayStation 2 that really simulates the Time Crisis arcade feel. However, you can use certain racing wheels, plug them into player 1 in the controller slot, and use the racing pedal as a pedal in Time Crisis. It's not ideal, it didn't feel great. I didn't include it in this because it wasn't a lot of fun, and now that's in storage. Anyways, I hope this was helpful to someone out there. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.